Welcome to Palestinian Voices of New York, where we sit down and talk to local New Yorkers about New York, Palestine, their faith, and family, as well as the Israeli occupation and what a liberated Palestine looks like to them. You can find more episodes at www.directactionunited.org.
Assalamu alaikum and hi. I hope you're all well. Today I am here with Mohammed Zahir, a Palestinian Lebanese student who was born and raised in Brooklyn, New York. His dad is from Gaza and his mom is from Jaffa and Safad. We are honored to have him here today to talk about his connection to Palestine. How long have you lived in this area of Binghamton?
I've been here for like 3 years, I'd say.
And how did you end up here?
Well, we were kind of recommended by a family friend to come to Binghamton University, and that's why I'm here.
And where did you grow up?
So I grew up in Brooklyn, New York for a lot of my childhood, but then I also moved back to Lebanon for a couple of years as well. And then I moved to Kuwait afterwards for a couple of years, and now I'm back here.
How were those experiences living
Yeah,
in
well,
different places?
I think for us, it's like, it's kind of part of the Palestinian experience, to kind of just be, thrown around. Like my whole family, we pretty much like had to work in like different regions around the world and stuff like that. And that's why our trips to Lebanon were always very like important to us, because that's where we would all kind of meet. Because the problem is, finding a job in Lebanon was difficult for like people with considered as Palestinian refugees. So my family had to kind of find work generally like just around the world. But yeah, so I guess for me it was kind of like a lot more natural to kind of just jump around from country to country. But yeah, I'd say it was a good experience. I feel like I learned a lot from it.
Out of those three, do you have any favorite?
Yeah, I think Lebanon. Oh my
Lebanon.
God, I love Lebanon.
What are some of your favorite places to visit?
So of course I always love going to the city. I love going to Brooklyn. That's where I grew up. So I have all my childhood friends there. And I think also like the Palestinian culture in Brooklyn it's like very refreshing to see, because you kind of still have the experience of being in the US, but you also have the experience of kind of like having people, back home around you. I think Lebanon for sure is very refreshing to go, because it also kind of reminds me a lot more of like, my roots and like kind of, where I grew up, and just the cultural values are a lot stronger, I'd say, back home in Lebanon.
Mm-hmm. And how do you stay in touch with your culture here in Binghamton?
Pretty good question, yeah. Well, here in Binghamton, I think, just by being active in the communities and like the Arab communities and like the pro-Palestinian communities, I've definitely found a lot of Arab friends, and from there, it just kind of clicks where we all just like get together, and it's kind of like, yeah, like we've kind of formed our own little community, which is pretty nice.
And how has that affected who you are today?
It's a good question. Yeah, I feel like for me, like with my identity, it like circulated a lot throughout my life. Growing up in the U.S., I didn't really have a strong sense of like, oh, like I'm Palestinian. I remember actually when I was a kid, I used to ask my mom like, oh, like why do you love Palestine so much? Like it hasn't done anything for you. And then when I got older, I started to understand that it is the characteristics and it is the pride that you have in your country and in your people. And once you start establishing kind of like a sense of peoplehood, and you identify these as your people, I think their achievements and their strength kind of like begins to embody you as well. And I think that is when I had a good shift in my identity, where I started, valuing this like Arab identity. Here in Binghamton, I think like it's definitely helped me stay and stick to that identity, where I don't have to like kind of change a little bit of who I am, because I think everyone changes, whoever they're talking to. But it's nice to kind of have a group of people that you can just, fully be who you identify most with.
Mm-hmm. What are some of your biggest life challenges?
Genuinely, just seeing what's happening back home always makes me want to be better and like do better. And to me, of course, like I've seen the poverty in Palestine, but I've also firsthand seen the poverty in Lebanon. and I've seen, like I've had friends who I know are hardworking, they're dedicated, and they're intelligent, but they don't have the kind of opportunities I do. I'm here, I'm in New York, I've been blessed with a lot of great opportunities, so a part of me feels obligated to like work hard and work harder, because I think that it would kind of mock them in a sense if I'm not doing the most with what I'm given.
Do you have any favorite foods?
Yeah, of course. Favorite food is mensaf. I think that's a very common Palestinian favorite dish. Yeah, now that I've kind of like, been eating around here, I just miss Arab food a lot more. But yeah, of course shawarma is like a given. But yeah, mensaf is, it's essentially like there's like a layer of sage bread, and there's yellow rice, and there's lamb, and then they put yogurt over it, and I think it's everything that I really like in food. It's flavorful, it gets you full, a lot of meat, and bread too.
Do you have any hobbies?
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I'm kind of like, because of this like, desire to like get better, I'm quite competitive. So I recently started getting into sports. I like football or like soccer or whatever. But soccer, just going to the gym generally. I'm also a part of a lot of clubs on campus. I think that's like a good hobby. Takes up a bit of my time as well.
Do you have any favorite movies or film recommendations?
I don't know. I think my attention span is too bad for movies. Like, hour and 40 minutes, I can't do it.
What are some experiences from Lebanon that you cherish?
I think when I first went to Lebanon, so I grew up, we used to go to Lebanon every summer, just like every break, we're always in Lebanon. But like originally, like I grew up in the States, and then it's just like at first, it's just such a different lifestyle, like back home, like we live in like a bit more of like a rural area. But, like it was nice, like all the kids knew each other, like every morning, 8 a.m., they all like pile up together and knock on everybody's doors, and they're like, oh, like is Muhammad awake? So I think it's definitely given me a sense of like when I really don't, I try to not take things for granted when I'm here, because I know like how it's like there, like hot water, that is a blessing for sure here. But even just like, eating good, eating healthy, and yeah, I think like my experiences in Lebanon have, like for starters, I mean, I love the experiences and how it shaped me, but also it makes me a lot more grateful, I think, for everything that I have here.
And any favorite traditions?
Oh yeah. I don't know. I mean, for me, like my neighborhood, we would just all get together. Like when it's like 8 a.m. in the morning, all the kids gather around up until, we play football until the light goes out, and then we all sit together. And I think that's kind of like, for me here, like most of my outings are like a reflection of that. Like every time I want to go out or I want to hang out with someone, I just invite everyone over to my place, and we just like, play cards and drink tea and stuff like that. But yeah, no, it's definitely, yeah, I love it.
Why are you proud to be Palestinian?
Yes, that's a good question. That's a great question, which also kind of like, I mentioned a little bit of it earlier, where I didn't really have that like strong sense of, like when I was a kid, like obviously I didn't have that strong sense because I didn't get it yet. And then my parents told me like, oh, like when you get older, you'll understand. And I think for me, yeah, like I'm very, very proud to be Palestinian. And my pride really comes from essentially just, once you develop a sense of, peoplehood and who you identify with, it honestly honors me to be able to identify with this group of people, very intelligent, hardworking, and, resilient, I think is a great word to describe them. It always kind of motivates me to push, further and harder. And, I think it's, yeah, like really inspiring. I think Palestinian people are very inspiring.
What do you love most about Palestine?
I love a lot about Palestine. But what I love most, I think, honestly, the way they always overcome. I mean, that whole land historically has, had a lot of conflict and a lot of, overcoming things. And I guess for me, when I feel like I'm at a point where I don't know if I can handle something, it's just, I think, yeah, like that strength that they have, the ability to overcome, the ability to adapt, I think that's something that like inherently I've had in my own life, where I had no issue kind of moving around between three countries throughout my childhood and stuff like that. But I think, yeah, like what I love the most about Palestine is definitely how much they can overcome.
What would you want the world to know about Palestine?
I'd want the world to know our story, really. I think a lot of, Palestinian, and I think a lot of media nowadays just kind of centers around buzzwords and, terminology. And, well, we've been kind of accustomed to, short headlines and kind of getting the gist about something through a couple of words, where it's like now you can essentially, the media or the way that things are portrayed to you are very, controlled by specific narratives. You can just understand who the good guy and who the bad guy is, through a headline. And yeah, no, I think once people understand the story of Palestinians, like what we've endured, what we've been through, and essentially like our genuine beliefs, our genuine values, I think that's what I would want people to know more than anything. And then from there, they can decide really what side they want to support.
Mm-hmm. So you've noticed a clear media bias.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And when you were visiting Lebanon, have you noticed any travel restrictions for Palestinians?
Well, although I do love Lebanon, Lebanon isn't, I guess, this is a pretty good point to bring up, where people kind of think that the story ends or the suffering ends once the Palestinians leave their land. But, refugees aren't treated that well, regardless. I mean, like for my family, they couldn't work as doctors and as teachers and, these specific professions in Lebanon. So that's why they had to like move out, and that's why we were kind of like scattered in that sense. So there definitely are a lot of restrictions for Palestinians. I think more so in the past than now. However, yeah, I mean, there's those kind of restrictions. I mean, even for like people who have been to Lebanon. I mean, I was when I came here for university, I got stopped at the airport and they asked me questions like, "Oh, like you're coming from Lebanon, so we have to, ask you questions about this and that and that." So I think, yeah, restrictions is something that I've noticed that I think I try to not, I try to keep in mind when I understand my privileges, because I have seen the restriction be imposed on people much severely than whatever I face here.
And how is life different besides that in Palestine and here?
I think it goes back to the idea of, restriction. Similarly, so I guess it, to kind of fit, or not a narrative, but to make it more understandable to people, like when you look at, Black communities here or underprivileged communities in the U.S., there's a system that is made to, demotivate people, to like the underprivileged people. Like sometimes, like there are things that are imposed upon them that are meant to demotivate them. Similarly, so in Palestine, like systems like the blockade, systems like random checkpoints, even like small things like it's illegal to collect rainwater in specific areas. Like, like these are just like essentially, although they don't seem as harmful as, being shot in the street, essentially it's way easier for them to just demoralize people and have them essentially like kill themselves at that point. I think that's a problem that we see in both here and there. However, it's definitely been taken to an extreme in Palestine, because if they fail to demotivate you, they can just decide to shoot you. So, yeah.
Have you noticed any online censorship?
Yeah, no, for sure. I feel like I spend most of my time on Instagram, and there's definitely a lot of censorship in that sense. I mean, with like stories necessarily, like having less viewership if they're talking about the Palestinian conflict, but also even like a very direct experience was like, so of course with a lot of the live footage that you see being taken in Gaza, where there's possibly like dead bodies and people under the rubble, and like Instagram has always had the feature where it's like, oh, this is sensitive content, But then like you would have to like click 3 buttons now where it's like it's sensitive content, and they'll be like, are you sure you want to watch this? And they'll be like, like they'll have like a, something like another disclaimer. And even at times it just wouldn't even work. And then there's obviously a bunch of pages that get taken down. And like, I think, yeah, the censorship is pretty insane, I'm not gonna lie.
What are your thoughts on the 1948 Nakba and any connections to it?
Yeah, hate it. Yeah, my grandparents, I guess specifically, were victim to the Nakba, where they had to, obviously leave their home and kind of start a new life in Lebanon from there.
What have you seen happen in Palestine since October 7th?
I mean, there's always been an issue of essentially like Israel having like, overstepping the boundaries in what they can do to people, like even outside of Gaza, in like the West Bank and in these areas. Of course, they already overstep in people's lives where they can randomly check their houses, they can randomly enter their houses. But even now, like, you can't even have an opinion anymore, really. Like, you can't show solidarity. Not even, it doesn't even need to be related to any of the attacks or anything like that. You can't just, like, show solidarity to other Palestinians. And, I mean, I think it's very ironic because, I mean, the very country that we're in, America, kind of has historically went to war against these kind of regimes that oppress people's, beliefs and essentially now they are the biggest supporter and practically the facilitator of this regime that tells people what they can and cannot believe in. But yeah, I mean, I feel like at this point, I'm kind of seeing another Nakba in the making. I mean, we started off with a population of like around 2.2 million throughout the Gaza Strip, and now they're all pushed into one city, and they've been pushed all the way to the border of Egypt, and now that city is being bombed. So, and then it comes to a point where, like, it's clear that the Israeli, that Israel is trying to push them out of, clearly trying to push them out of Gaza. And now, like, yeah, what we can clearly see is another attempt to, essentially kick out around, like, I think there's 1.6 million Palestinian people in Rafah right now. This oppressive regime has always been a part of the Palestinian people's lives. And that's why, to Israel, the victory is in kicking them out of the country, because killing them has clearly not done anything. Like, Palestinian people have been killed indiscriminately. There's been a lot of killings that were completely unjustified. A lot of children who, have sniper bullets lodged into their heads. These, like, it's clear that, like, they've done this for a while, and it hasn't done enough to demotivate the people into essentially caving in on themselves. So really, like, the success for Israel is kicking them out, and we can see that, that is what they're trying to do now, because they realize what they've done before hasn't really done enough.
And how does seeing all the pro-Palestine rallies make you feel?
I think for me, it definitely makes me feel a lot less kind of alone in all of this. Because for me, I'd say, like, I'm at a point now, I mean, I'd say for a lot of people, we're at a point where, based on people's political views, you essentially have a predetermined opinion about them, and, you kind of know whether you would like to interact with these people or not. So it's nice to see, like, communities have such strong beliefs and support to your community, because I think in a greater sense, it unites a lot of the people who are suffering from the same thing. In Binghamton University, there were a bunch of multicultural organizations that sent out statements in solidarity of the Palestinian issue. And, I think, like, activities or just, like, generally stuff like that, I think is very valuable, because it is clear that throughout history, there has always been a person who has gotten the short end of the stick, and just because it changes color or changes ethnicity from time to time, people kind of stop thinking about the perpetrator. less, they think more so of the victim. But I think it's a strong message to have all the victims unite and shine a light on the perpetrator of these aggressions. So I think the solidarity amongst other communities is honestly one of the only good things that's come out of this whole thing.
And how do the UN responses and other global responses make you feel?
I mean, it's definitely upsetting to see how they've turned out, in a sense of, them getting vetoed, and just essentially the whole world is unable to come to a conclusion because of the US. One singular country is able to put a stop in, like a whole unified opinion. I think that to me is something that's quite frightening, because like it has just like painted this false sense of democracy, or false sense of unity, where we are the United Nations. Well, not really, because America has to approve of whatever the United Nations approves of, So the sense of unity is, I think something that I believe lessened. But I also don't think that these attempts that they've done are, without should be gone without praise. I mean, although nothing has come of it, it's still nice to see people fighting on our behalf. It's still nice to see countries like, Ireland make these great statements and, really put themselves out there for the Palestinian people. I mean, and I think that with all these countries' strong solidarity, things will never go back to what it was before, the attacks on October 7th. I mean, beforehand, of course, there were a lot of countries that backed Palestine, but now I think from now on, moving forward, so many countries have completely cut ties with Israel, and so many countries very much so question the efficacy of the state. So I think, that is another one of the few, I guess, things that you could salvage from the conflict is, I think it's revealed, well, I guess, what the Palestinians have seen from the state of Israel that has been kind of covered up and hidden has been revealed to the world now. And I think, that truth being out there and reaching the UN and reaching the Hague and all these facilities, I think is still somewhat of a victory.
Mm-hmm. And what did you feel when you first heard about these attacks last year by Israel?
Yeah, I mean, I when the attacks first happened, definitely nervous. Me, along with like almost any other Palestinian person that I talked to, all felt a sense of nervousness, because we didn't know what was going to come from it. I mean, Israel essentially like jumps at any opportunity given to attack, but to be honest, I didn't even think it would get to this extent. So it's kind of, I've been in a constant state of awe from that moment until now, where you think that you expect the worst to come, but then, worse even comes afterwards. But yeah, no, definitely just, I feel very rattled. I think, that's a good way to.
And what does Palestinian liberation look like to you?
So for me, Palestinian liberation, I think for everyone, Palestinian liberation should look like a one-state solution where that state is Palestine. It should be, also, I don't think religion should play a big part in dictating the livelihood of the people. And I think it should be a safe haven for Christians, for Jewish people, and for Muslims, or for whoever wants to really be in that land. And everyone should just be united under the name of a Palestinian. I think this is a problem now where they separate the identity of being Jewish and being Palestinian, where no, if you are native to that land, and you can be Jewish, people talk about the issues of who is native and who isn't. There are native Jewish people, of course, but to me, they're Palestinians, because I believe that Palestinians are the native people to that land, not the Arabs, not this, not that. But yeah, I think just generally, it should just be a safe haven for whoever wants to call it home. I think everybody historically, I guess maybe not historically, but generally, in the recent historical events, Palestine has been welcome for anybody who really wants to be there. And I'd like it to kind of stay as that, home that anybody could really call home, and you don't need to be a specific religion or a specific look to kind of call yourself a Palestinian.
What is your basic message to those who may side with Israel or who are undetermined?
For those who are undetermined, if you just look into it, if you genuinely do proper research, I think it's going to be hard to actually be on the side of Israel. So genuinely, like, I think for anybody who is, undetermined or on the side of Israel, genuinely, I think, like, historically looking at the events and the authenticity and the, the people's desires, the people's goals, and how the Palestinian people initially treated the Jewish people who first came to Palestine, and how Jewish people have historically been treated in Palestine, it's kind of hard to support Israel afterwards. For me, like, my great-grandparents lived, in Palestine. My grandfather lived in Palestine, and the Palestinians were, like, they came in all looks, like, whether they're Jewish, Christian, or Muslim. And although my family is Muslim, we used to have Jewish, people take care of children. They babysit for us, and we would babysit for them. And I mean, for us, as, like, culturally, that's a big thing because we value our family and our children a lot. So to kind of, I think that's a great display of trust amongst communities, where we trust them to enter our homes and take care of our children, and vice versa. You have the solidarity between Christians and Muslims in Palestine, where they've historically taken care of each other's communities. People shouldn't look at it as this is a Jewish Arab conflict, or this is a conflict between a religious conflict. Palestinians are not just Muslim. I think that's an important thing. And just like how Americans aren't all Christians, like, whoever claims whoever claims to be native to that land, you are Palestinian. But yeah, I think to kind of, like, wrap up the message for those who are kind of unsure, like, just look into the history of the matter, and I think you will naturally come to understand that the Palestinian side is the one that you should support.
So do you believe that Palestine can be a land where Muslims, Jews, and Christians live in harmony?
Yeah. Before the state of Israel, that's how, of course, like, you could go through history and probably nitpick specific points, but I think one important thing to realize is, at a time where Jewish people were being exiled and ostracized, Palestine was a place they could call home. And I think it would have been a great foundation for a future where people can understand each other better. I think, like, with the food and the culture and just all these things, like, we all share these things.
What are your thoughts on the United States politicians who continue to allow the genocide of Palestinians?
Of course, it goes without saying that these politicians don't care really about the conflict. They want to profit off of it. I mean, with Binghamton, there was a event where I think there were flyers that were put around in show of solidarity for Palestinians at a Zionist event. Although it wasn't done by SJP, and the Zionist organization on campus admit that it wasn't done by SJP, you had representatives like Molinaro tweet out how SJP Binghamton should get shut down and these things. I mean, it's clear that he did not look into the actual matter. He just wanted an opportunity to jump at SJP. And I think, like, realistically, from interviews and from these matters, they don't know really what is going on. I mean, America has historically been able to just kind of flip a switch by using the term terrorist to kind of just incite people to attack. You had, like, the war on terror, where people now look back on and they're like, oh, like, it wasn't really a good idea. We shouldn't have done that. But at the time, everybody was like, well, they're terrorists. Of course we should, attack. Of course we should wipe them out. I mean, even with threats like ISIS, ISIS was terrorizing the Middle East. Back when I was in Lebanon, one of our neighbors child got kidnapped by ISIS. Like, they were a real threat to Muslims. They were a real threat to Arabs within that region. So for kind of like, people in the U.S. to kind of use that against us, like, oh, you guys are ISIS. Like, no, we are afraid of ISIS. Like, it's just this history of specific, like, buzzwords that are used to just essentially control how people feel about topics. And I think it's no different now where we see it, where it's like, oh, they are the enemy, they are a threat to freedom in this place, or they are a threat to Americans. I mean, we've had like people being people feeling threatened by Hamas in the U.S. I mean, I think they have their hands full right now. They're not gonna decide to, I think a lot of these fears are essentially bolstered by the government because they want you to be afraid. That is historically been the best way that they make narratives run. I mean, even now with narratives about like, minorities, or like gun safety laws, or even like, issues of the schooling system and all these things, like, they are ran through fear. They want to brainwash your children. They want to do this and that. I mean, regardless of the validity of the sentiment, the method is always through fear,
How do you feel about the recent legislation that equates anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism?
Horrible, yeah. No, the legislation, I think, the problem with that also that I've seen directly is, so, okay, for starters, I think it's important for me to say that I do not think that anti-Semitism is anti-Zionism, because I don't think that the state of Israel is representative of Jewish values or Jewish beliefs. Like, it doesn't take me to say that. There's a bunch of communities and there's a bunch of pro-Palestinian Jewish people, but also, generally that I feel like when you look at Israel's actions of killing innocent people, indiscriminately bombing, and all these things, I think, for a Jewish person to say that, yes, these are representative of Jewish values would be disgraceful to themselves. Like, these are things that, like I don't, of course there have been horrible things that have been done in the name of Islam. These are things that I don't personally I don't want people to have that representation of Islam either, So, but the problem with the equation of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism is now Jewish people feel unsafe because now that they've been equated, there is a huge rise in anti-Semitism, what's labeled as anti-Semitism, because since that's labeled under anti-Semitism, since they've expanded the definition of anti-Semitism, especially at a time like this, you'll see like statistics of like anti-Semitism increasing, by like triple-digit numbers, but which I think paints a false narrative to just like, Jewish people who are just trying to, not be targeted and harassed. And I think it's fair because, as a Muslim, there is a genuine fear of being harassed because of my belief, right? I think everyone has a fear of, being targeted. And I guess this also plays into the use of fear in, pushing political agendas, where now Jewish people feel like, oh, these SJP rallies are anti-Semitic, so now I have to, step into this, or now I can't be on that side, I have to represent this side. So there's a sense of even like peer pressuring into, catering to one side. I think like, with like, even like in politics, like once they get to label someone as being Islamophobic, now the people who are Muslim feel obligated to not support that person. And like, it is because we all have a sense of duty to our people and our religion and, where we identify with. But then this just creates a sense of weism and splits people even more.
Speaking of Islamophobia, how do you define Islamophobia?
Well, I think it's essentially just discrimination based on the fact that a person is Muslim.
And has your community or you yourself had to deal with Islamophobia personally?
I've faced Islamophobia in France, but like, that's France. I've been privileged enough to not have to like, that's not something that I have to really worry about. And like my identity as a Muslim is something that I feel confident in. But what's it called? I mean, my family growing up in the civil war in Lebanon, being Muslim is that is part of like where the civil war started. So that is like a real problem that people had to face. But yeah, I mean, outside of just my personal experience, of course, Islamophobia is growing rampant now that this conflict is, in like key terms like terrorism is being brought up again, like the same like people who have kind of went dormant after, the same like, aggressive people from like the 9/11 issue who have just went dormant are kind of now resurfacing in the same, essentially under the same guise of, oh, these people are terrorists. They like the SJP rally is something that is against America, and it is a threat to U.S. sovereignty. And I think like a lot of these narratives of essentially they are a threat to U.S. sovereignty are being resurfaced, where like, oh, like these college campuses are trying to implement a specific belief system that they want everyone to follow, which is essentially the same, fear-mongering tactic that they use with the Sharia law, where, oh, like the Muslims here want to impose Sharia law upon us. I think that's why when I was talking earlier about reading into the history of the topic, I think the reason why I think reading into the history is really important, because you see the so much kind of like repetition in a lot of what's happening. I mean, the U.S. has kind of like perfected its tactic, like an offensive technique, and it's kind of just essentially regurgitated it from there. But also, it's taught Israel these techniques as well. I mean, U.S. is, they're not uncommon to issues of settler colonialism. I mean, that's what they did with Mexico. And, a lot of the tactics that they've used to kind of suppress minority voices or generally get what they want are being used in Palestine as well.
Mm-hmm. And is Israel holding Palestine under blockade and preventing food and humanitarian support from entering Gaza?
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you can see like literal video evidence of these trucks not being allowed into Gaza. I mean, you even have like just Israeli citizens just like lining up and stopping these trucks from entering. I mean, we've seen a lot of money being sent to like UNICEF and to all these humanitarian organizations that simply just want to supply the people with food, yet the people are starving. So clearly there is a problem. And you can go and try to, I mean, at some point you have to realize like you are just like it is naive to just assume that all these humanitarian organizations are trying to supply, things other than food, or weapons to, Palestinian resistance. But yeah, I mean, which is an actual argument that people try to make. But in the end of the day, I mean, we can see that these aid trucks are not being permitted to enter Gaza.
What are some ways that they can be supported?
I think right now, the biggest, I guess, kind of like thorn in, or I guess the biggest advocate for Palestinian, oppression really is the U.S. I mean, you could say, Israel is the one who is directly doing the harm, but the U.S. is the country that is stopping any form of retaliation or repercussion from happening to Israel. The U.S. is single-handedly stopping all these United Nations countries from helping Palestinians, but also saving Palestinians, feeding Palestinians. So I think the Israeli government is too radicalized to actually try to, create some kind of commotion to, sway the political parties into supporting Palestinians. But the U.S., it is generally run off of profit. Like that is essentially their motive for everything that's happening. It's not, they don't really care about the ethics or really like, who's right and who's wrong in this matter. They really care about where the profit is. So I think it's up to the people, because, at the end of the day, they profit off of us. It's up to the people to stop this like obstacle that is just protecting Israel and letting them do essentially whatever they want without being punished by outside forces.
How and where are you keeping up with information coming out of Palestine?
Right now, a lot of the sources that I get are on Instagram. And most of it essentially is just like live footage. It's not even like opinions or like what is what people think is happening. It is like literally I'm seeing the rocket being dropped on these group of people, but also a lot of these pages that circulate that type of content also have updates on like, let's say, like UN proposals, and stuff like that. I'd say Instagram is definitely one of the biggest influencers in where I get my media.
And what are your final statements to the Free Palestine supporters?
We need to like work to kind of stop this narrative of Arab and Jew, Muslim and Jewish person, and like this separation, because being Palestinian was never about the color of your skin, was never about who you pray to or what you believe in. Being Palestinian is being native to that land, and that is really like what it is. So once we run narratives like this, where we don't play into their narrative of separating people and creating a mix and essentially, downplaying both of the people's struggles, where it kind of goes into a match of who suffered more and this and that. We should work to unifying these communities. And also, I think we need to understand that for a lot of the Jewish people who are Zionists, and generally it comes from a place of fear. I think that's one thing that I've noticed personally being involved in this conflict. A lot of it comes from a place of fear. So I think extending an olive branch, olive branch, but yeah, extending that olive branch and showing that like we are not against Jewish people. We don't mind Jewish people living in Palestine, and we don't mind calling Jewish people Palestinian either. I think that's an important sentiment that we need to share, because we've gotten so deep into this conflict where it's now just fear, and I don't think you can out-argue somebody when they're just afraid. I think, emotions are like, your rationale kind of just stops when you start believing that your life is at risk. And when you believe that this group of people, their victory is at the cost of your life, you don't need to know enough about the topic to actually want to be, on one side or one other side. I think the most important thing right now is to set the message straight. We want that land to be called Palestine, and I think it's welcome to anybody who wants to call it Palestine as well.
And what would you want to say to the audience on behalf of your loved ones in Palestine?
Free Palestine.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Palestinian Voices of New York. Continue following along with interviews and local actions by subscribing at www.directactionunited.org. And as always, Free Palestine.